They tricked the single dad with a paralyzed woman on a blind date. He didn't know she was the CEO. Rain poured over the city that night, cold, relentless, and somehow cleansing. In a small diner at the corner of Maple and 7th, Ethan Walker, a single dad and auto mechanic, sat nervously across from an empty chair. He wasn't the type to do this in blind dates, fancy restaurants, or even thinking about himself. His life revolved around Lily, his 7-year-old daughter, and fixing cars to keep food on their table. His friends at the garage had set this up as a joke. "Come on, Ethan, you need a life." "Just one dinner," they'd said. He didn't know much about the woman he was meeting, only that her name was Grace. The diner door opened with a soft chime. Everyone turned. A woman in her early 30s rolled in, Grace, with chestnut brown hair tied neatly, calm eyes that hid a quiet strength, and a wheelchair that seemed as much a part of her as the smile she wore. Ethan stood up, startled but polite. "You must be Grace?" She smiled. "And you must be the man my friends tricked into a blind date." Her tone was playful, but her eyes studied him, curious, cautious, hopeful. Ethan scratched the back of his neck, chuckling awkwardly. "Guess we both got played," they laughed. The tension broke. Over coffee and pancakes, their stories unfolded. Grace had been in a car accident 2 years ago, spinal injury, physical therapy, and a life rebuilt from scratch. Ethan shared how he'd lost his wife during childbirth, how raising Lily alone had been both a blessing and a battle. He didn't pity her, and she didn't see him as broken. They talked for hours about favorite movies, dreams they'd buried, and second chances. Grace noticed his hands, calloused, stained with oil, honest, the kind of hands that worked for love, not for show. When the waiter brought the bill, Ethan reached for it immediately. "Ethan, please," Grace protested. "No," he said gently. "Let me, you already paid more than enough." By showing up, her eyes softened. That simple act, the way he treated her with respect, without a trace of pity, hit her deeper than any compliment could. A week passed. Then another. Ethan thought about her often, but she never called, and he didn't have her number. He assumed maybe she wasn't interested, and that was okay. Maybe she just needed a night of normal conversation. Then one morning, as he was helping Lily get ready for school, a sleek black car pulled up outside his small garage. 2 men in suits stepped out, followed by a woman in a tailored navy blue dress. "Grace." She smiled at his stunned expression. "Still fixing engines, Mr. Walker?" he stammered. "Grace? What's going on?" The men behind her exchanged smiles. Grace rolled forward, handing him a folder. Inside were documents stamped with the logo of Revive Automotive Innovations, a global company that had recently announced plans to open a new manufacturing plant in town. "I'm the CEO," Grace said softly, "and I've been looking for someone who builds not just machines, but trust, heart. You're the kind of person I want running our community program. Full benefits, great pay, and a chance to make a difference." Ethan blinked, speechless. "You're kidding." "I don't joke about opportunity," she said, smiling. "Besides, my board thought it was a bad idea to hire someone I met on a blind date. I told them kindness isn't a risk, it's an investment." Months later, Ethan stood outside the gleaming new Revive plant, watching as Lily ran into Grace's arms, laughing. Grace's wheelchair gleamed under the morning sun, but she seemed taller than anyone there, strong, confident, unshakably human. Ethan realized something then. They hadn't tricked him into a blind date. They'd given him a miracle disguised as one. And as Grace looked at him, her eyes filled with warmth and something deeper than gratitude, he understood that life's greatest surprises often come wrapped in the moments we least expect. The months that followed were nothing short of transformation. Ethan had never stepped inside an office before, yet here he was, managing Revive's community mechanics program, training young apprentices, single parents, and even veterans who'd lost their way. His hands were still rough. His clothes still smelled faintly of engine oil. But now he wore a badge that read, Program Director Ethan Walker. Grace visited often, not as the CEO in her power suits, but as the woman who laughed easily, teased him for his stubbornness, and found joy in the smallest things. She had a way of turning every setback into an opportunity, every scar into a story. But there was something unspoken between them. Every time their eyes met a little too long, every time Lily ran to Grace and called her Auntie G, Ethan's heart stirred with something he wasn't ready to name. And Grace, she felt it too. But she'd built walls of her own. The accident had not only taken her ability to walk, it had taken her confidence to love again. "Who could love me like this?" She once whispered to her reflection. "Who would choose me when life already made me half?" She didn't know Ethan already had. One autumn afternoon, while the air smelled of rain and rust, Ethan was in the workshop teaching a group of trainees how to rebuild an old Chevy engine. Grace arrived quietly, watching from the doorway. "Still running miracles with a wrench, I see," she teased. He grinned, wiping his hands on a rag. "And you? Still sneaking up on hard-working people like some kind of undercover boss?" Grace laughed, that soft melodic sound that made the whole garage feel lighter. "I came to give you something," she said, rolling closer and pulling a small envelope from her bag. "Open it." Inside was a photo, an empty building, once a rundown community center. Under it was typed, "Future site of the Walker Foundation for Family Empowerment." Ethan looked up, confused. "What is this?" "Your idea," she said. "You talked about how you wished single parents had a place to learn skills, to rebuild their lives, just like you did. So I bought the property. We'll fund it together." He was speechless. "Grace, she smiled gently. "Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll keep changing lives." Ethan's voice caught. "You already changed mine." That evening, after everyone left, the two sat outside the garage, watching the sunset bleed gold into the clouds. Lily was drawing chalk hearts on the sidewalk. Grace turned to Ethan. "You know, when I met you, I thought it was a prank. I didn't want to go. I'd given up on love, on connection. But then you sat there, nervous and kind, treating me like a person, not a project. You made me remember who I was before the accident." Ethan's eyes softened. "You never stopped being that person, Grace. You just needed someone to remind you." A quiet moment lingered between them, warm, honest and full of something that didn't need words. Then, unexpectedly, Lily ran up and placed a chalk heart between them. "Daddy, Miss Grace, this one's for you both." Grace laughed, but her voice broke. Ethan reached out instinctively, resting his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. For the first time in years, she didn't feel broken. She felt home. 6 months later, the Walker Foundation opened its doors, a bright, welcoming place filled with the hum of hope. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew news crews and community leaders, but the only thing Ethan cared about was standing beside Grace and Lily, the two people who had rewritten his story. As the cameras flashed, Grace leaned toward him. "You still think it was a trick?" Ethan chuckled. "Yeah," he said softly. "But the best kind." She smiled, radiant, fearless. "Then let's keep tricking fate together." The crowd cheered. Confetti filled the air, and in that swirl of color and laughter, Ethan realized something profound. Sometimes, life doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you need, wrapped in the disguise of coincidence.